I think I just got thrown under the bus as part of that compliment, but still, thank you. Well, it's great to be with you guys tonight. Thank you for coming out, and thank you for being interested. Maybe you are only here to hear me, and I appreciate that. I'm going to be sharing now for about an hour or so and talking about this topic of flashpoints. Where is the next war likely to be? And we're going to look at some of the geopolitical challenges in Russia, in North Korea, in Iran, and Syria, Lebanon, Gaza. There's lots of options to choose from. We're not going to be able to cover everything. But we'll do that for about an hour. At that point, we're going to take, it won't be a break. We're just going to take a moment to take an offering. Now, you did give $30 to come tonight, but we're going to give you an opportunity, if you're interested, and we hope that you are, to make an additional contribution to the work of ministry architecture. And we'll be taking an offering at that point. So you can be thinking now about if you want to do that and how much you might want to do it, and even fill out a check to Ministry Architecture, Inc. It's totally tax deductible. So we'll be taking an offering, and then immediately we'll be going into questions and answers. Well, at least questions, hopefully some answers. But that's the plan for the evening. Then we'll do some book signing if you're interested. So I just want you to have a flight path for the rest of the evening. Now, one of the things I love about what my parents are doing is the actual work itself, right? Ministry architecture. My father was an architect professionally for more than 4 decades in a commercial context. And rather than retire, they decided, we keep hearing about opportunities and needs for these ministries in developing countries, ministries that want to preach the gospel and make disciples and train future missionaries and children and so forth. But they need facilities, they need orphanages, they need missionary training centers, they need medical missionary hospitals, and all these different types of things. And they, as you heard, they have gotten more joy, I think, in the last 20-some years about doing this than all the other professional work that my father had done as an architect, and my mom as a teacher, and again, with a great love, both of them, for teaching the scriptures. My mom with a real heart, and I think a spiritual gift of evangelism, being asked to come into these countries and minister to the leaders as they try to figure out what type of facility do we need, and we need professional guidance so we do it right, that we're good stewards of the limited funds that this ministry has. That's the work of ministry architecture. And look, when I'm 79 years old, I don't know. I hope that my wife and I will be eager to be invited to a country where you could get chewed up by venomous creatures, like at 115 degrees. And if that weren't enough for the year, well, yes, we will go. We will go north of Siberia. We will help the Youth with a Mission develop a ministry training center to reach young people with the gospel of Christ, train them to reach the rest of the people, the Eskimos of far-flung Russia. Like, most people are watching TV or at the casino or playing golf or what have you, skiing. Not, maybe the casino part not good, but the rest of it, not wrong, but wow, when 8 decades into your life, will we be following Christ that faithfully? I hope that's the case for myself and my wife and of course our kids. And I appreciate so much the model and the example that my parents have been to me and to our family and to our extended family. And to me, coming every year and doing a one-night event, they only do one fundraising night a year. I love to do it. I keep telling them, you have me every year. Maybe you should get another speaker, somebody people haven't heard from yet. But nevertheless, I'm here, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to get into the meat and potatoes in a moment, but I just want to ask one question. How many people have never been to a ministry architecture event before? If you just raise your hands. Okay, wow, that's a lot. So I'm assuming the rest of you have been. Okay, because it's an either-or question. So I'm encouraged. Thank you. So this is what they do. And Generally, when I talk, I'm sort of the draw to try to get you here, and I'm going to talk about whatever God has put on my heart. Sometimes it connects with what they're doing, especially when they go to radical Muslim countries or Middle Eastern countries generally, but sometimes it doesn't connect. This year it connects, okay, because my most recent novel, some of you have read it, it's available here, it's called The Kremlin Conspiracy. Now, well, thank you, there's one person who appreciate it, some relative of Putin, and now you gotta love, I gotta love my parents because I'm their son, but you have to love them because had they even read the book? Do they have any idea what I'm warning about in this novel? The novel is about the most dangerous dictator on the planet is clamping down on religious freedom, political freedom in Russia, and he's preparing a surprise attack against NATO, assuming that if he invades one of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, or all three of them, that this Russian dictator in the novel figures he could grab these one or two or three of them in about 96 hours and go so fast that NATO would not have a moment to be able to respond in time. And once this leader, this sort of czarist character would grab and hold these territories, that NATO would have to make a decision. Are we actually going to go to war to drive the Russians out of one of these Baltic states? And if we do, what if Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons to repel us? And once our people in NATO start dying from tactical nuclear weapons, are we going to use tactical nuclear weapons? And then will they use strategic nuclear weapons? And will we therefore, this thing is, can go bad very rapidly. Now, the risk is if you don't fight the Russians, if you let them grab 1, 2, or 3 NATO countries, small, most Americans can't find the Baltics on a map, admittedly, but if you let them grab one of the countries that's part of the NATO alliance, and you don't honor the Article 5 provision of the NATO Charter, which is that if one country is attacked, all the countries in the alliance act as though they've been attacked, and everybody comes to the defense of the attacked country. If you don't trigger Article 5 and go protect that country, that's the end of NATO. The end of NATO. You can't have a NATO alliance that says we're a mutual defense pact if you don't defend each other. But if you defend each other, you may end up in a nuclear war with the major nuclear superpower, or power at least, on the planet. Yes, China has nuclear weapons as well, and Pakistan and India and a number of other countries. But Russia, as we know, is the big kahuna. And the theory in the novel, I'm not giving it all away, I'm giving you the premise, the setup. The czar, the Russian dictator, his theory is if I do this, NATO won't fight me because they're not going to go to nuclear war, and therefore they'll huff and they'll puff and they'll put sanctions on me or whatever, but they're not going to actually go to war. And therefore, in about 96 hours, if I take this gutsy, crazy move, I can unravel the entire NATO alliance. 96 hours, done. That's the premise of the book. So first chance they call me and they say, hey, we're going to Russia. I said, did you read it? Did you have any idea what I'm talking about here? Yes, it's fiction, but people. Dad, remember your heritage. Okay, so Dad is a first-generation American, born in the United States, but his parents and grandparents were Orthodox Jews from Russia. They escaped because being an Orthodox Jew in Russia in the early 1900s, it was not good, right? We had these terrible anti-Semitic attacks against Jews known as the pogroms, in which more than 65,000 Russian Jews were murdered during that time. People were raped and beaten and their possessions taken and their houses burned. And so you had two choices. If you were an Orthodox Jew, in the early 1900s, Orthodox Jew in Russia, you had two choices. You could fiddle on the roof, or you could try to get out. Now, their family tried to get out. So they all hid in a hay wagon that was crossing a border outside of Russia. And at the border, Tsarist soldiers took their swords, plunged them into the hay to see if anyone was hiding in there. Now, by the grace of God, no one in there was injured. None of the kids sneezed. None of the kids said, "Are we there yet? I gotta go to the bathroom." They kept quiet. They got out. And by God's grace, once they were out, they didn't go, "Whew, oh, finally, we're free. Let's settle in Poland or Austria or Germany or somewhere in Central or Eastern Europe," where many Russian Jews who did leave did settle and ended up going through the Holocaust. God was very merciful to my father's family and got them on a steamship and got them to the United States. And like any good Jewish family, they set up shop in Brooklyn, which is where my father and his brother were born and raised. Now, that's not typically the type of person that goes back. Let's go see the homeland. Let's go see the old country, right? Now, a number of years ago, I think it was 2004 or 5, Mom and Dad were visiting, my wife and I and our kids. We were at that time living in Washington, D.C. We live in Israel now. And at the time, I was doing research for my first novel, and actually a nonfiction book at the same time, that was going to have a major Russian element to it. This is the most recent one, the Kremlin Conspiracy. But this was back a number of years ago, the Ezekiel Option, and a nonfiction book called Epicenter. And I really felt that to do the books correctly, I needed to go to Russia. Now, I'd been to Russia back in 1986, when it was not considered a flashpoint, when Russia was undergoing what was known as perestroika, sort of restructuring, and glasnost, which was the openness and the opening of that Russia was going from communism to trying to reform communism under Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, in 1986, I was a college student at Syracuse University, and I got invited to go on a summer missions project with Campus Crusade for Christ, now known as Cru. And they were going to send us into then the Soviet Union, smuggling Bibles and sharing the gospel with college students for a month. And I thought, oh, that's the coolest. Yes, I want to go. Having grown up on the Bible and James Bond movies, one of them not being so healthy for me, but I mean, the idea of being sort of an undercover, go into the Soviet Union, sort of being a spy, doing that for Jesus, oh my gosh, that was like the perfect convergence for me. And it was a fascinating time. Now, years later, I said to my father, listen, I haven't been there since then. Russia's very different. And as I'm going to work this into my storyline and my nonfiction book, and I think that while Russia, the Soviet Union at that point was just a few years from collapse, right? It was 4 years away from being over. The Berlin Wall was just a few years away from coming down. It wasn't a flashpoint then. The country was getting sucked into Afghanistan and it was taking their economy down and so forth. But I said, I sense that Russia under Vladimir Putin is emerging again as a new threat. And I would like to go there, and I wonder, Dad, if you'd like to come with me to the old country and meet some fascists. And he said, sure, I'd love to do that. And so it was a fascinating trip. I won't get into all of it, but I will say, as I think he started having second thoughts about it as we were getting closer to the trip, because he was doing a lot of reading about, there was a lot of Russian mafia activity, and there was a lot of radical Islam through Chechnya. There was a lot of, because of the Chechen War, women who were widows, their husbands had died in the war with Russia. They were known as black widows, and they would come into Moscow and other major centers as suicide bombers and blow themselves up on the subways or, in department stores. And it was becoming a dangerous time. And just a few days, in fact, before we left, a woman, a black widow, blew herself up in front of the subway station closest to the hotel where we were going to stay. I said, Dad, do you still want to go? I'm going to go, but you don't have to, of course. I mean, they did find this woman's head on the roof of the subway station, and he said, no, I think, I'm praying about it. I'm a little anxious, but yes, I will go. Okay. But he kept telling me all these different ways that maybe we shouldn't do this, and maybe we should walk separately, and maybe we should heal all these security things. I'm not sure they were the most current security approaches, but they really had to know that we're different if we're on two different sides of the street. I'm not sure that was going to be the case, but the point is, as we were there, even though there was a lot of problems going on, there were troops on the street. I mean, Moscow had become an armed camp, helicopters overhead, sharpshooters. I mean, they were really worried about terrorism. But my dad somehow there was going into sort of his missionary mode where he was feeling peace. All the preparation to go was creating anxiety. But once he got there, he was like, no, this is where the Lord wants us. I'm feeling good, and this is so fascinating. And there's the Kremlin, and there's the St. Basil's Cathedral with those beautiful onion domes. And so we're walking across Red Square, and he's feeling very relaxed, okay? And he knows I'm there to do research for a political thriller, and he says right out loud, do you really have to blow up these buildings? These are lovely. What? I'm like, for a novel, people. Like, I think we've moved from anxiety to just saying whatever we want, wherever we want. We may have moved a little past the line here. So, but look, I want you to be praying for them as they go. I believe that darkness is falling on Russia. I mean, I don't just believe it. Darkness is falling on Russia. Vladimir Putin, who was gaining power, rebuilding his military, beginning to flex his muscles in 2004, 2005, has got total iron grip control over the country now. He has essentially outlawed missions work. You even as a Christian in Russia, an evangelical, you're not even allowed to invite a friend to church. You can't email a friend to say, will you come to church? You can't share the gospel with people. You can't hold an open air preaching of the gospel or teaching of the scriptures. What Billy Graham got to do in the early 1980s, but then also in the early 1990s when the Soviet Union fell apart, he was invited to preach to Moscow Stadium 4 days in a row, preaching the gospel in the stadium they built for the Olympics, with billboards and bumper stickers on cars and everything. It was reaching that city with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you can't do that anymore. I'm grateful for the heroes who are the Russian followers of Christ, who they don't have any choice. They can't leave. The doors have closed around them. And they are still trying to find their way to faithfully walk with Jesus and proclaim Jesus in a very, very difficult environment. A man who is standing against the cross and who has invaded Crimea and taken it over, invaded eastern Ukraine, invaded and occupied 20% of the Republic of Georgia, and has sent his forces to ally himself with the butcher of Damascus, and is helping Bashar al-Assad in Syria wage his war against his own people that has led to the deaths of 500,000 people, and more than 6 or 7 million people are on the run for their lives in Syria. Some have fled the country and are in Jordan or Iraq or Turkey. Some who are known as IDPs, internally displaced persons, and they haven't left the country, but they've left their homes on the run because of the carnage. It's not just that Assad is using chemical weapons against his own people. It's that Vladimir Putin told us that he would make a deal with Assad to remove all those weapons, all the chemical weapons, so that President Obama would not trigger his red line statement and attack Syria, and we were assured that all those chemical weapons were gone, and yet they are still being used. This is who we have as the current leader of Russia. And even though my character is fictional in the Kremlin Conspiracy, anybody who's watching the life of Vladimir Putin may see echoes of some of it. It's not totally him. I take license, and I put words in his mouth that, don't know that he has said, and actions that, I project it forward. So my point is not that a novel, what I try to do is use novels both to entertain. That's my first premise, right? My goal is to get a tweet or a Facebook message or an email from you at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning. You are cursing me because you have got to go to work in a few minutes and you've been up all night reading, and you are furious with me. At midnight or 1, you thought, yeah, just one more, just one more. But I write these chapters like Pringles. You can't eat just one. They have a short first sentence, and then they're fairly short chapters, very intense with cliffhanger endings. And because they're short, you think, ooh, I just want to know what can happen. Well, the next chapter's short. One more. Now it's 3 o'clock. Now it's 4 o'clock. Now you're cursing me. Now, maybe not you. Maybe you're not actually literally cursing me. Maybe you're just being unkind to me. Or down in Texas, they'll say, I can't believe it. You're a terrible person. Bless your heart. I think the Christians down in Texas, they think if you soften it a little bit, like, you're a moron, you're a terrible person, bless your heart, then that softens it a little bit. But I know what they mean. Look, Putin is leading his country to a very dangerous place. First, you don't want to set up your entire country against the cross of Christ. Bad idea. Has never worked well for any country that's tried it. Okay? Then he's invading multiple countries. And he's looking for another target. I was very concerned that the Baltics were not well defended enough. That's partly why I wrote the novel. I think that the current administration and NATO have beefed up the forces there. I don't know if it's enough, but at the moment I don't feel as concerned for a Russian quick strike on the Baltics as I felt 18 months ago. Now I think Putin's primary focus is on the Middle East. And so I would say, when we talk about flashpoints, I would say, while Iran is the most dangerous player in the Middle East, I believe that Vladimir Putin is the most dangerous man on the planet. That the Russian military under Putin is the most dangerous threat that we face. Because what we worry about in Iran is Iran gaining, building, acquiring nuclear weapons, right? But Russia already has them. The question is there some scenario that Russia gets themselves in an actual nuclear firefight? Now, we pray that never happens, but when you have someone who in many ways has not been thwarted by the West, is taken what he wants when he wants it with very little repercussions to himself or his country. This, when you don't stop aggressors, they get more aggressive. That's just the way of the world. And I believe that we need to understand who Putin is, what he's doing internally, what he's doing externally, and we need to be very vigilant. And as believers, of course, we don't run countries, we don't run militaries, we need to be in prayer. We need to be praying for American leaders, NATO leaders, to have the wisdom to know how to thwart Putin's aggression. And in terms of the gospel, that's our main area. We're not asking the American government or any European government or any government to do the work that only the church can and should and must do. And that is to strengthen our brothers and sisters, encourage them, pray for them, visit them if we can, and help them do the work of the kingdom. Because that's a country, Russia is, that is going to face the judgment of God. I don't say that because the United States isn't going to face the judgment of God. We're going to face them too. You can't kill 60 million babies and not face judgment. You can't. That judgment's coming. Why it hasn't come already, I can't tell you. But we are in some season where God is saying, I'm not done with you yet. But the blood of those children are crying out from the ground. And they're going to have justice. So we have to understand that we're in a very, I'm not going to try to predict. There's no way to predict how long God will give America the grace to keep going. But we have to use our time and our talent and our treasures both to reach our neighbors and our families with the gospel of Jesus Christ now, here, in this country, and to use our time and our talent and our treasures to strengthen our brothers and sisters and help extend the gospel, advance the gospel, fulfill the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations, of every part of every nation, in the time that we have. The time that we have as a country before God brings judgment to us, and the time that we have in our own personal lives. We don't know how long we have on this earth. And so when we're standing before Jesus one day, we want to have used our time and our talent and our treasure well. And I'm inspired by my parents, and it's I would help them anyway, unless I thought they were doing something wrong. But I help them anyway. But I love what they do, and I have no hesitation to ask people to help them. And to look at that model and say, okay, what might God be saying to you at any stage of your life? How could I be using my time and my talent and my treasures, even if have a sciatic nerve problem, or even if my mom needed, I think, did I say this already? 18 wheelchairs, 20 wheelchairs to go to they were building a medical missionary hospital in the jungles of Borneo, Indonesia, a few years ago. And I think my mom needed 18 or 20 wheelchairs round trip. Now, to me, I'd be like, if you need 20 wheelchairs, you probably should stay home. Like, no one's going to ding you and like, oh, you're so lazy. But they felt they were supposed to go. And when Jesus says go, you go. Or you're supposed to. And I say that to ourselves. Is there any area of our life where God is telling us to go do something or take his message or his love or his compassion to someone or somewhere that we're saying, yeah, I'm not doing that. I got my own problems. I got my own frailties. I've got my own sicknesses or financial challenges. I'm not doing that. I'm not, Lord, find somebody else. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's so much more, it's challenging and it's difficult, but it's so much more joyful to say, Lord, I'll go where you tell me to go, and I'll do what you tell me to do. Just give me the wherewithal to do it in your strength and not my own. So I'm very concerned about Russia. And so, generally I'm not entirely sure if somebody who's named Rosenberg, who's connected to me, because we've known each other, for a long time, and he's mentioned that. I'm not, should they really go when their son has been very vocal about Vladimir Putin? Should you apply for a visa and go into Russia? Yes, if that's what Jesus wants them to do. And so I want you to be praying for them, that they do get their visa, that if the Lord is in that he protects them and guides them. There was, Brother Andrew, some of you may know, he was known as the God Smuggler. He helped lead a ministry to smuggle millions of Bibles, New Testaments, into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union during the worst years of the Cold War. And I got to know him years later. He wrote a wonderful little paperback about his ministry called God Smuggler. Highly recommend it to you. But he had this great prayer, and he called it the Smuggler's Prayer. He would fill up his little VW Bug with Bibles, and he would drive to a checkpoint, with guard towers and German shepherds, and soldiers with machine guns and all looking. So, and as he inched up to the gate, he would say, Lord Jesus, when you were on earth, you made blind eyes to see. Now I pray, Lord, that you would make seeing eyes blind so I can get these Bibles to your children for your glory in Jesus' name. And time after time, God would blind the eyes of people, or the car in front of them would be smuggling drugs, or there'd be some issue and there'd be a big kerfuffle and they would just wave him around, whatever. There's all kinds of ways. So I'm praying that the Lord would blind the eyes of the authorities and let my parents do what they have been called to do. And I love that they're willing to go no matter what. But that's Russia. That's a flashpoint, and they are the makers of flashpoints. Now, let's move across the planet to North Korea. Now, a year ago, I would have said North Korea was one of the highest, I think I did say it here, the most concerning places in terms of a potentially imminent flashpoint in a war between the United States and North Korea, and of course, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the entire region. You know, we were seeing, I think, 5 nuclear tests in the early months of the Trump-Pence administration. We saw ballistic missile tests. So they're trying to get their missiles to go further and further, capable of reaching the United States of America. And you had the president, bless his heart, tweeting, you know, about Little Rocket Man, and, you know, and you're like, oh, that just seems like a combustible relationship. Like that, you really want to get in a Twitter war with a nuclear-powered lunatic. And I'm talking about the dear leader in North Korea. And I just think that didn't seem like a good situation, right? Very dangerous. And we're in a different moment. In an amazing way, I would say that the president's very strong language and flying nuclear-armed B-2 bombers over the peninsula and positioning more aircraft carriers and other weapon systems into the arena and building a strong, refreshed, renewed alliance with South Korea and our Asian allies put an enormous amount of pressure. The sanctions as well. President Trump seemed an unlikely person to be able to build a relationship with the leaders of China, who he's bashed a lot also because of their trade policy and other issues, and rightly so, I believe, in a number of areas. But that seemed like an unlikely 2 leaders, him and the president of China, to come together and think, can we put more pressure on North Korea? And yet it has happened. And then you have this historic meeting between the president of the United States and the lunatic of Pyongyang. 34 years old, he's got the systems ready to wipe out South Korea. And he's building the systems to hit us. And you'd rather be talking with him than not, but let's remember, the question is whether the dear leader of North Korea, what does he want? That's the question. Does he want to de-escalate? Does he want to create a peace treaty? Does he want to denuclearize? Or is he buying time through the talks to back the U.S. off a bit to finish his systems and be ready to attack? And how closely is he working with Russia to get that done? I believe he's working very closely. How closely is North Korea working with Iran? I believe that the data tells us that Iran is paying North Korea to be a nuclear weapons testing site. Okay, North Korea is testing these weapons, but they're desperate for cash. And Iran is desperate to get nuclear weapons. But Iran is pretty crafty. Their leaders don't want to invite an Israeli attack or an American attack, so they're outsourcing, right? That's the new global way. If we can pay cash to a regime that needs cash, and North Korea can do the testing for us and give us the data, this works out well for Iran. They can keep doing what they're doing, keeping the U.S. and Israel at bay while getting all the information they need when they're ready to rapidly put together operational nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them. That's the next novel, by the way. Tipping my hand a little bit. I just finished all the edits on The Persian Gamble and that'll come out in March. And that's the relationship between the leaders of Russia, North Korea, and Iran in this, shall I say, devil's triangle. You're obviously not watching the Kavanaugh stuff too closely, or you'd be laughing at that. But anyway, that was a term that came up during that terrible last 2 weeks. But anyway, that nexus of Russia, North Korea, and Iran, I believe, is the most dangerous set of relationships that are on the planet. Which brings us to Iran. Okay, if you're looking at a flashpoint, now, I was actually speaking to someone backstage a little bit before we came out here, and I said, and they mentioned, the gentleman had his notebook with him. He said, 2 years ago, Joel, you went through, up at this podium, the 15 reasons that the Iran nuclear deal was insane and incredibly dangerous. I said, wow, did you write down all 15? He said, no, I didn't write them all. But I mean, I remember the talk, I took a lot of notes, and look at where we are now. This is true. Iran, sorry, I'm having a Marco Rubio moment. Just give me 1 second. So, Iran, their leaders are Shia Muslims, but they come from a sect known as the Twelvers. Okay? The Twelvers are a subset of traditional Shia Islam. They're in the radical camp, but they're not just radicals, they're actually apocalyptic, meaning this sect within Shia Islam believe that we're living in the end of days and that the Islamic Messiah, known as the 12th Imam or the Mahdi or the Promised One, they have a number of names for him, that person is either on the planet now or coming very, very soon. And the way to hasten his arrival, or if he's already here, then his emergence to full power to build a global caliphate or kingdom, the way you help accelerate that is by annihilating Israel, which is the little Satan in their theology, eschatology, and the United States, which they consider the great Satan. Okay? So, this is what the leaders of Iran believe. Not all Iranians, not even all the government, but certainly the Ayatollah Khamenei and his inner circle. Now, they are therefore determined to get the very weapon systems that will enable them to commit genocide once they're ready. And this is why we can't take our eye off the ball with these guys. And yet, President Obama, in my view, completely misunderstood the intentions of the Iranian leadership. His view was that the Iranians were feeling like outcasts, and ever since the Islamic Revolution of February of 1979, when they overthrew the Shah and they brought in the Ayatollah Khomeini, that they were now feeling on the outside of global society, and that they needed an on-ramp back onto the highway of international commerce and civil society. So the best way to do that, President Obama said, was to make a deal with them that would incentivize the Iranian leadership to give up their nuclear weapons ambitions and just pursue their nuclear energy ambitions, and help them build a new relationship with the United States and Europe and Russia and the world. That was his theory. Because that was his assessment of the nature of the leaders of Iran and what they wanted. I see it entirely different. And it depends, one of the themes of my novels is to misunderstand the nature and threat of evil. To misunderstand it is to risk being blindsided by it. We didn't understand Imperial Japan in 1941. We knew they didn't like us. We didn't think they wanted to attack us. Moreover, we had a very racist view of the Japanese, that they weren't capable of anything sophisticated, that they're, everything that they produced was junk, and they just literally couldn't get across the Pacific Ocean, so we didn't even have to worry about them. We didn't understand their intentions. We didn't understand their ideology. We didn't understand their ambition, and we didn't understand their technology or their tactics or their strategies, and we got blindsided by at Pearl Harbor. Likewise, the world was blindsided by Adolf Hitler. He did write Mein Kampf. He told us pretty much exactly what he was going to do. Nobody believed him. Except Churchill, for whom everybody laughed at him and said, oh my gosh, if you're going to give one more speech on Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, blah, 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 give us a break. Winston, you're a broken record. Move on with your life. It's pathetic what you're, and then it happened. And I hope you've seen The Darkest Hour. It's a really powerful film that talks about how outcast he was. I think I mentioned that at the beginning of last year. I think it had just come out. I love the tagline that they had in all the advertising for the movie. They said, he was not their first choice, but he was their last hope. The story of Winston Churchill, right? The movie begins with Neville Chamberlain getting a vote of no confidence by the parliament, and now Neville Chamberlain and his inner circle are sitting around having dinner, and they're like, and Chamberlain says, listen, I'm going to step down tomorrow from being prime minister. We've got to pick someone else to replace me. Who can we pick? And they all say, oh, it should be Lord Halifax. And Halifax, no, it's not my time. I'm not, it's not the right moment. And everybody said, well, who is it going to be? And then you hear everybody go, oh, no. Oh, no, we can't. No, that's insane. That's ridiculous. Oh, come on. No, absolutely not. And the next scene is Winston Churchill waking up, and he's getting the nod from the king to be the prime minister. People thought he was a crank who didn't know what he was talking about, didn't understand anything, because he was a broken record on the Nazi threat. But I go back to this point. To misunderstand the nature and threat of evil is to risk being blindsided by it. Chamberlain was blindsided by Hitler. He made a deal at Munich, which was insane if you'd read Mein Kampf and you believed him. If you didn't read Mein Kampf or you didn't believe it, then maybe you'd have a different view. That was Chamberlain. Churchill read Mein Kampf and said, I believe Hitler. That's why he's dangerous. That's why we have to stop him. And the sooner we stop him, the better. We all know what happened. 9/11, right? So we were blindsided. Al-Qaeda told us what they were going to do effectively, and we didn't believe them. So this is the dangers. And I think that what we're seeing with Iran is a fundamental misunderstanding of the previous administration and much of Europe at who the leaders of Iran are and what they want, and therefore what their ambitions are and how far they'll go to carry out their objectives. And that's dangerous. I was in the joint session of Congress several years ago when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came to Congress, and you maybe remember, he spoke to the joint session, making one last attempt to explain to the American people and their representatives why the Iran nuclear deal was dangerous and would actually not block Iran's path to nuclear weapons, but would pave it. I was invited by a member of Congress. He gave me a ticket, and I was so honored to be there. It was such a historic moment. If you were interested in what happened earlier today, it would be like getting to be there. I wasn't howling or screeching. I mean, I was just sitting there. But it was interesting to be in the chamber in this historic showdown between a small country, 8.9 million people, the prime minister of a country of 9 million people taking on the president of the United States. Like, nobody else in the world did it. Nobody else in the world would dare to do it. But Netanyahu thought it was an existential threat to his people, my people, our people. And so he felt, I have, as a friend to the United States, not an enemy, but as a friend, I need to come, if I'm invited, and I've been invited, to make the case one last time. So I'm sitting there, in the balcony, in the what's it called? The gallery. That's the word. Thank you. He's being so helpful, Gino. Bless his heart, and I mean that positively. It can be used both. It can be used both ways. So, yeah, just to be clear. So I'm sitting there, and I kid you not. I mean, I know I'm a fiction writer, and I know I make things up for a living, but I'm not making this up. Listen, Netanyahu's giving a speech, and he's really building to a crescendo. And the man sitting next to me goes, this is crazy. This sounds just like a Joel Rosenberg novel. I kid you not. And I'm like, I'm feeling a little, I'm like, okay, and I realized that even though we've been chatting, that we had not introduced ourselves in the moments before the speech started. But he's like, have you ever read one of these novels? It's crazy. It's like, this is like right out of one of his novels. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it later. And he keeps saying this, like that. Like, did you ever read it? I'm like, I said, can we just talk about this afterwards? Because I'm waiting for Netanyahu to go, gentlemen, I'll wait till you're done. I would, be mortified. So anyway, he continues his speech. And when the speech is done and we all give a standing ovation and we're all saying goodbye to each other, he turns to me and he says, have you ever, oh my gosh. And all the blood drains out of his face like, oh, I'm so mortified. I can't believe it. Anyway, that was kind of fun. There are certain people in history, for all their idiosyncrasies and even their weaknesses, sometimes they can see evil that others cannot. And what's interesting, I don't want this to be a political evening in any way, shape, or form, but I'm going to put some cards on the table. I was a never Trumper until Thursday before the election. Okay? I had been very vocal. This guy is going to be trouble, right? I looked at his life. I looked at what his policies were. I looked at his history. And I concluded this is not going to be helpful. We have 16 other options. Let's try them. Anybody. I told you, I may have mentioned that I'm a failed political consultant. For 10 years, I worked in politics. Everyone I worked for lost. In that election season, I met with, I believe, 14 of the 17 candidates. Guess who I didn't meet with? So the president won. Mr. Trump won. He becomes the president. I was on CNN about a month after the inauguration. I was on Anderson Cooper, and I had just been to the National Prayer Breakfast where the president had spoken and had, in his usual controversial way, made some comments. You're like, something's good, something's not so good. Anyway, there was a woman who was really it was a left-wing woman. She was really letting him have it on the show. And Anderson turns to me and he says, now, Joel, as I understand it, you were a never Trumper until the election. I said, yes, that's true. He said, well, what do you think? Well, do you agree that the president, can't seem to say something nice about anybody? And I said, well, listen, I think there's a difference. First of all, as an evangelical, it was like a marriage I didn't think was a good idea, him getting elected to president of the United States with no experience and his unique personality. But as an evangelical, now that the marriage has happened, I want it to work. I want to help where we can. But I said, I think there's a difference between being a critic, which I am and will be sometimes, and being a cynic who can't see any chance that the man could ever do anything right. Okay? I don't think it's healthy to be cynical. I think we should be critical when we need to. I'm even skeptical of whether he will keep his promises about who he's going to appoint to the Supreme Court. Not today. I'm being honest with you. That's quite amazing. I didn't expect him to do what he's done, to keep his word. Nor did I expect him to scrap the Iran nuclear deal. I didn't expect him to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. That law to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was passed under Bill Clinton in 1994. This law has been around for a long time, and nobody has actually done it. Why would I believe that he would do it? Why would I believe that somebody with no foreign policy experience and no military experience would decide to scrap the Iran nuclear deal? Look, the president has gathered some very good people around him, and I think one of his strongest qualities, look, I'm still critical of his tweeting. He has he shouldn't have said anything about Dr. Ford. Just don't say anything. Speak highly of of Judge Kavanaugh. I support that, but don't speak about her. Especially you. Don't do it. I'm not mean about it, but I don't agree with it. I don't agree with some of the things that he does. I'd like somebody to. You can't constitutionally take his phone away from him, but Melania just said that she does sometimes. I'm like, don't go to Africa then, unless you got the phone with you. But anyway, the point being, I'm surprised about this. I'm just being honest. When I watch him, I see a lot of mistakes, but I see someone who has the capacity to learn. It's the capacity to learn. He did not declare that he was going to scrap the Iran deal during the campaign. Everybody else said, I'm going to rip it up the first day. He said, maybe we'll renegotiate it. I'm like, no, it's a disastrous deal. We're not going to renegotiate it. But that wasn't his position. He came to that position, okay? There's a number of other areas. So NATO, in the campaign, he said NATO is obsolete, and I'm not sure we even need NATO. I'm like, oh God, dive. What are you talking about? Now, he morphed that position into a new position, which was, okay, maybe I'll stay in it. Maybe we need it, maybe. But they're not paying their fair share. Well, now I agree with you on this. All the countries of NATO several years ago made an agreement that we were all going to spend at least 2% of our gross domestic product on our military so that we're prepared to deal with Vladimir Putin and the Russian military threat. But most of the countries in NATO don't do it. So I agree with him, and I was glad to see him say, okay, we do need NATO, but what we need is a NATO that's not just criticizing the United States every day of the week and then not spending their own money to defend themselves. They're the first people that are going to get invaded, not us. So I agree with him, and actually, who knew, right? I mean, maybe you did, but I didn't. His constant jawboning, attacking, criticizing, is actually getting NATO countries to start spending more money. They're all, not all of them, but most of them are starting to step up and realize both the Russian threat. Now, on Russia, the president has been good in some areas and quite bad in others. Okay? Meaning, he's being criticized or attacked, alleged that he's in collusion, criminal, corrupt collusion with Vladimir Putin. Now, I have not seen any evidence that proves that. And I do believe, I think one of the things that's come out of this Brett Kavanaugh fight is a renewed emphasis on the presumption of innocence. That if you make an allegation against someone, that's not enough. You can't ruin a man or a woman's life and career based on an allegation. There has to be some serious level of corroboration. You have to have evidence. Otherwise, the person has a presumption of innocence. I give the president the presumption of innocence. I'm not going to assume that he's a criminally corrupt person in bed, as it were, politically, with Vladimir Putin. If it's proven that, then that's treasonous, and he should be impeached. But we have no evidence of that. Moreover, we have some other evidence that goes the other direction. Why, if you're in a treasonous relationship with Vladimir Putin, why would you pick Jim Mattis to be your Secretary of Defense? Why would you pick Mike Pompeo to be your Secretary of State? Why would you pick Mike Pence to be your Vice President? Why would you pick Nikki Haley to be your UN ambassador? Why would you pick John Bolton to be your national security advisor? It doesn't make any sense. Those are not consistent choices with treason. Moreover, why are you trying to get NATO to spend more money and getting them to do it? Now, abandoning NATO, that would seem to fit Putin's objectives, but not trying to get them to spend more and succeeding, right? Putting more sanctions on Russia, kicking Russian spies out of America. So my point is, those actions are not consistent with the allegation that's being made that he's corrupt. But there is one thing that's weird. One thing, and it's important. President Trump is radio silent when it comes to Vladimir Putin. He will not criticize the man. Now, this is not really exactly in the nature of Donald Trump to hold himself back. He appears incapable. He's more critical of his attorney general than he is of the worst dictator on the planet. Like, that's odd, right? Why is he that way? I don't know. If you want to go into that, there's some possible scenarios. We can talk about it in Q&A, which is coming up in just a few minutes. But I want to conclude with a positive, okay? So you got Putin, dangerous man. The dear leader in North Korea, working with Putin and the Iranians, and yet in a moment where maybe things are de-escalating somewhat, and maybe there's a possibility for breakthrough. I'm not sure yet. Iran, terrible, horrible, and getting worse. The Iranian leadership effectively has control over 4 Arab capitals: Beirut, Lebanon; Damascus, Syria; Baghdad, Iraq; Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. This is not good. Iran is using the $150 billion that we gave them and the removal of the sanctions to continue to fund radical Islamist terrorism all over the region. People are dying. Countries are being destabilized. But there is a positive development, specifically with the Iran deal, and unintended consequences. One of the most fascinating things is the growing Iran threat and the Obama administration's tilting from their traditional alliances of Israel and some of the Arab countries over to Iran freaked out Israel and the Sunni Arab countries, really rattled them to their core. And it's caused the Sunni Arab leaders to fundamentally reassess this question: who is my friend and who is my foe? And what you're watching is the United States is steadily re-energizing its strategic alliances with Israel and with the Sunni Arab countries. Where was the first country where President Trump traveled on his first trip abroad? Saudi Arabia. That's not where we would normally go. But something's happening in Saudi Arabia. And he didn't just meet the Saudis. The Saudis invited the leaders of 50 Muslim countries. Now, President Trump was a man who told us during the campaign that he was going to ban every single Muslim from entering the country. I criticize him for that. Radical Muslims, yes. Terrorists, yes. But you can't just say that we're going to ban an entire religious group. But he changed his position on that. Okay, but he goes to Saudi Arabia. Now, what's interesting in what's going on in Saudi Arabia, and by the way, last week I just met with the Saudi foreign minister. First time I've ever met with a Saudi official. It was actually the last 2 weeks in the country. I sat down with Vice President Mike Pence. I met for 45 minutes with Secretary Mike Pompeo, just the two of us. Those two happened to be readers of my novel, so that was fun, but we also talked about Iran. We talked about religious freedom in the region. I met with the Saudi foreign minister, the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, and I had a 90-minute meeting with a group of 6 other evangelical leaders with Egyptian President El-Sisi. Very, very interesting, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that part in the Q&A time. Hopefully someone will ask me a question, because I want to tell you a little bit about that. But if not, I'll find a way to just talk about it anyway, because I have the microphone. But what's happening, we have, and so I'm going to wrap up here in the next 2 or 3 minutes, and then we're going to take an offering. So just putting you on notice that that's the shift that we're coming, and so I would love to see you not paying attention to me and writing a check to my parents for large amounts of money, but I'm just saying this. Okay, now, what's happening in Saudi Arabia is historic, and probably not noticed much by people who have their lives filled with lots of other things going on. But in the last couple of years has emerged a new crown prince who is the heir to the throne, and his name is Mohammed bin Salman. In the region, they just call him by his initials, MBS. Now, he's only 33 years old, but he is a game changer in Saudi Arabia. He's the one who's starting to make very bold and stunning and surprising reforms. For example, making it legal for women to now drive. Not in the entire history of the kingdom could women drive in Saudi Arabia. He has now allowed movies to be shown. Movie theaters are opening, and concerts are coming, and investors are being welcomed. And there's a whole range of changes, economic and social, not political. He's not really opening up more political freedom. No, in fact, I would say he's going in the other direction right now. He's getting a lot of opposition from the hardliners in his country who don't want to see the country open up and be a modern, normal, civilized country that the rest of the world is going to invest in and work closely with. But MBS believes that they're running out of oil, and therefore they're going to run out of money, and that they've wasted decades of their money, trillions, on fun when they weren't building a modern economy. And he's also making overtures to, hey, it's time to make peace with Israel. We want them to make peace with Israel, the Palestinians first, but we don't have a fundamental problem with believing that Jews should have their own state. He's saying these things on the record. I pray that he's not assassinated. Right? This is Saudi Arabia. So, but what's happening? The number one thing he worries about, besides his own economy and the need to make rapid, huge, fundamental changes, he's terrified of Iran. And he noticed that the only guy that stood up to President Obama on the Iran issue in the entire world was the Israeli prime minister. And something is going on where the Sunni Arab leaders, whenever President Trump is talking about the Iran threat, he's unifying the region. Israelis and Sunni Arabs and the United States. When he's talking about Jerusalem and the peace process, he's dividing the region because there's a lot of differences there, but not as many differences as there used to be. Something fundamental is happening. And I'll just note this as I close this portion of the talk and we prepare for Q&A. In some small way, I'm getting a chance to see it up close. I'm 51 years old. When I was born, the leader of the Arab world was Egyptian, Gamal Abdel Nasser. 45 years ago today, his successor, Anwar Sadat, was invading Israel in the worst surprise attack in our history, Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur War. That was 45 years ago today. 45 years later, Egypt has peace with Israel. Egypt has kicked out all the Russian military advisors. They're not buying most of their weapon systems from Russia, but from the United States. They have a strategic relationship with the United States. And the president of Egypt 3 times now has met with me. Like, hello? Why? The first time I met with him, and this is my last point, and then we're gonna pray and take an offering. But when I first met him in April of last year for my first time, and now I've had 3 meetings just since then, he invited me to bring a group of evangelical leaders with me in November to meet with him and understand his worldview and to build a friendship. And I flew home from that meeting in Washington back to Israel and had Passover with my family and our next door neighbors. And they were like, this is crazy. You were meeting with the president of Egypt and now he's asked you to do this? What is going on? Tell us the story. And I told them the story, but then I said, listen, think about it this way. Imagine a Jewish man standing before the leader of Egypt on the eve of Passover and saying, let my people come. That's not how the story goes. Something different is happening in the Middle East. And our job is to both understand it geopolitically, economically, but also for the purpose of the gospel. To strengthen the church in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia even, in Israel, in the Palestinian territories, in Russia. To use this moment where things are not quite as bad as they have been and not as bad as they're gonna be. We're in a moment where we have to seize that moment and do everything we can to advance the gospel with the opportunities and the open doors that we have. Ministry architecture is part of that, and that's one of the reasons I love what my parents do. Let's close this portion in prayer, then we'll take an offering, and then we'll go immediately to Q&A. Father in heaven, thank you for this time. Thank you for all those who've come out tonight to talk about these issues, both to talk about what are the flashpoints in this world? Where are the areas that things are dangerous and getting more dangerous? But also, what are the opportunities? Where are the doors opening? Where are things changing? Where is the gospel advancing? Even when people are opposed to the gospel, that you're still advancing your kingdom. Thank you for ministry architecture. Thank you for my mom and my dad. Thank you for all the volunteers that have come around them over the years and helped them. Thank you for every donor that writes a check for $10 or for $1,000. Lord, thank you for for Gino and for the church here and how much they've been so supportive and praying for ministry architecture, seeing the value of this ministry, welcoming them and hosting them here on these annual evenings. Lord, we thank you for this. And we pray you'd show each of us, what is our place? What should we be doing for you that you're calling us to do, even if it's hard, even if we're old, or even if we've got infirmities and challenges? What is it that you're calling us to do that we will miss the joy of Christ if we say no to? Lord, help us to be people who will give you our time, our talent, and our treasure for your glory, for the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.